My name is Christian Ashley, a seminary student and servant of God, and you are listening to the Let Nothing Move You podcast, a proud Anazal Ministries podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the next episode of the Let Nothing Move You podcast as we continue on through the book of Leviticus. And I say we, because I'm not alone today. Returning guest, wonderful man, opened up his home to me not too long ago. Pastor Will Rose, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. How's it going, Will?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. And I'll just go ahead and make a confession right now that I'm while Joshua and I share similar viewpoints for how interpreting Scripture and how we view Scripture, I will say that Leviticus is not one of my favorite books. Like him, but I'm really to tackling this. It's still important. It's a part of the canon, and I'm ready to read it and see what God opens up through the reading of this text.
Yeah, I've got a confession, well, more of a correction to make. Last episode, I did the pseudepigraphal book of creation, and I made the claim that hands and feet aren't organs. Apparently, they are, and I, in my limited viewpoint, only think of internal organs as organs, but beyond that, I did some research after the fact and go, oh, wait, no, I was an idiot. No, noses are organs, ears are organs, your hands and feet are organs too. So
your skin, isn't your skin like the biggest organ that you have? It's like an organ.
So I was completely and utterly wrong.
Nice. You know, it takes a humble man to admit when they're wrong. And I admire you, Christian.
Thank you, Will. I do believe in transparency. I don't want to be there's enough misinformation out there in the world. I'd rather not be part of it. So if I need to correct something, I'll correct it.
Yeah.
But Will, glad to have you back. Why? I mean, out of everything, you wanted to be on something else. I know that no one else had picked. But why 21 through 22? Why'd you ultimately pick those for today?
Well, you know, I am a pastor, and Christian and I are both priests to the geeks on systematic geekology. So this whole passage of how priests or those serving the temple or those kind of set apart or aside for a different kind of purpose for being mediators between God and God's people interests me because that's how I'm kind of viewed. Like Lutheran understanding of pastor versus priest is a little different in terms of shepherding versus kind of an intercessory mediator between God and people, but this whole idea of the priesthood and what makes them pure or not, or what they're supposed to do, and some instructions that revolve around how they deal with people and community and the dead and other things kind of interests me to kind of get into a little bit, because I do think people lift up and they hear you're a minister or a pastor or a priest, are like, oh, they're on a pedestal. They are holier than us. They are held to a different standard than normal people. They don't cuss in traffic, and they have the patience of Job, and they they look at the world through different eyes. And I think some of that comes from passages like this, that's where that stereotype comes from.
Okay. Well, you want to get into this bad boy?
Let's do it.
All right. Starting in Leviticus 21, verses 1 through 9. This is in the ESV. And the Lord said to Moses, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, no one shall make himself unclean for the dead among his people, except for his closest relatives, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, or his virgin sister, who is near to him because she has had no husband. For her he may make himself unclean. He shall not make himself unclean as a husband among his people, and so profane himself. They shall not make bald patches on their heads, nor shave off the edges of their beards, nor make any cuts on their body. They shall be holy to their God, and not profane the name of their God, for they offer the Lord's food offerings, the bread of their God, therefore they shall be holy. They shall not marry a prostitute or a woman who has been defiled, neither shall they marry a woman divorced from her husband, for the priest is holy to his God. You shall sanctify him, for he offers the bread of your God. He shall be holy to you, for I, the Lord, who sanctify you, am holy. And the daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by whoring, profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. So on that cheery note, what do you think, Will?
Yeah. I was kind of thinking about making some jokes about bald spots, how you and I are both follically challenged. And so That there's some instructions there. But then when it talks about burning prostitutes to death, I was like, holy moly, there we go. I think about when I think about Leviticus and the law, and I think about what the Israelites set in this context, and the Israelites coming out of slavery and being set apart and being sitting on a hill and being a light to the nations and revealing God. I think a lot of this was about survival as well. Not just like, oh, we're doing this just to make you do like spiritual jumping jacks before the God to see if you can do it, but they're trying to work out themselves how to survive and while being different out in the world. So a lot of these things are just kind of them trying to be practical and healthy. And, they didn't have penicillin. They didn't have medicines or vaccines back then. So they're trying to figure out what's clean or unclean, what's going to keep them healthy, what's going to set them apart. So I think they're just kind of working those things out as a group and a community. So when it comes to the dead and how you deal with a dead body, the priests represent life, right? So they're representing life and God. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't you see death as unclean or impure or the enemy or something to guard yourself against? And so I do like it that it's making some provisions here for your closest relatives and taking care of your closest relatives. But in terms of just like being either disrespectful or flippant to a dead body, or not knowing what happens with the decay or what you can catch or not catch in disease, I can understand why they're being really prickly around this and being really intentional around like something that is dead, so that in terms of health and purity, I guess. Yeah. We'll get thoughts on that. We'll get to the prostitutes and the virgins and things here in a minute.
Yeah. You're right. Dead bodies are something that's just going to naturally happen over time. We are finite creatures in this mortal coil. So there need to be rules around what happens because we degrade over time. It just happens. And dead bodies themselves were viewed by the Israelites as like the ultimate completion of their sinful natures, as opposed to, the holy and perfect God they work for. And priests were forbidden to interact with them, like we said, unless they were deceased relatives, because their whole shtick was to remain holy, and they couldn't defile themselves by touching a dead body. But knowing all of this in context, God still in rich in mercy allowed a caveat in the law to allow them to touch and mourn family members that they had lost, because he doesn't want you to be cold and calculating and not caring for people. It seems you seem more aloof in that circumstance, instead of, no, I lost someone. I should be mourning. I should be able to touch them, experience what's happening here with everyone else, because how else am I going to associate with people who've suffered that?
Yeah, and being someone who's been present in rooms where family members are mourning someone that's dead right there in their midst, or in the hospital, being present with them, there is something just super mysterious and sacred and holy ground being in the presence of death with your own loved ones, but also being a shepherd or a priest, taking care of people who are in the grieving process as well. So, I think they're trying to work out what death means for them and what's going on. But these priests themselves are also have a role in the temple. So they're trying to work out, what's different for them among other people. And, some of it I could see as archaic or outdated, but they're trying to work out their role as mediators for the people, in place of and for their God, sticking up, being there for the people, for God. So I can understand why they're trying to work out how to navigate complicated things like that, in their midst. And then there's some instructions of what, how their hair is to be kept, or their sideburns, or their hair. Again, it's a sign, when people see me with a clerical collar on, they know that I'm a priest. You see a police officer with the uniform on, you know who that is. And so when you see these particular priests who are their head and their hair, then you know who they are. So there is is also this sign of being able to be visible and know who they are and their role in society and their culture at the time too.
Yeah. And part of that as well was, in this whole scenario, is wrestling with how to handle the dead, how to handle your grief, And we have here like how you're not supposed to do it.
Yeah.
They're forbidden from harming themselves or for trimming their beard in certain ways because those were practices of the Canaanites. And they were supposed to be annihilating them. And to bring in those aspects into their own culture would be seen as, allying with what they were doing in a sense. So some of these things like, don't cut yourself while you're grieving. You can rip your clothes, but don't do it to your body. Your body doesn't deserve that. So just be thinking about this in the midst of everything, because you're already hurting. Don't make yourself hurt more.
Yeah. Yeah. And, get towards the end of this little passage about, in terms of marrying and prostitutes and food, again, they're trying to navigate a patriarchal society and what that means. There's a little different understanding of women and roles of women from what we have today. I will share, while I don't share thoughts with Joshua on Leviticus being the best book in the Bible, I will say we probably align ourselves most in terms of interpretation and context and literal or set in context for them and their time and then what we understand about women and roles today. So a little bit differences there in terms of how to handle things. But we're getting kind of an insight to how they navigated culture and what their neighbors are practicing around them, and what they feel is right or not right, or hear God calling them to be, makes a difference. And I think reading and interpreting these passages.
Yeah. Well, on that, we have with who they're supposed to marry and not, and why would they be held at that standard? Because the people aren't held to that standard, but the priests are. In that they can't marry a divorced woman. They can't marry someone, who's had sex out of wedlock, because the whole part of them is that they're supposed to point the people towards holiness. And that's not to say that the women who were involved in this, or if a priest was involved with that, that means they're shunned forever. They can never be part of the fold. But there's a point God is making about holiness. It's like, you are the standards everyone else is going to look up to. So live by the best standards possible. Now, once again, there's wisdom we can take from this. This is not how every pastor is supposed to do things now, because we're no longer under the law. So there are plenty of pastors out there who have, themselves suffered from sexual sin or have married someone who's done that. And God still blesses the marriage. But this is specifically at this point in time for them. Don't do it.
Yeah. And I reflect on almost like this caste system or class system and, the hierarchy of priests and people and peasants and holy and not, I wrestle with that a little bit. I kind of understand what's going on in their culture of that day, but certainly today, I don't want to be of course, I want to be a good witness, lead a good witness, not lead anyone astray in my congregation. But I also don't want people to see me as not a real person who wrestles with those things or hold to a higher standard different from what they are, because I believe in the priesthood of all believers, that we're all before God equal. I just have a different role and called to a different role, or how I shepherd this community. But yeah, some of that I now kind of reading this, seeing where that stereotype comes from. It's like, oh, well, you're the professional religious person, so you are held to a different standard than the other people. So you better not do these things or else. And I'm like, wrestle with that.
Yeah. And last part of this, I have something to say on is what we mentioned before is, there is, if one of the daughters is brought into prostitution, more than likely because of the father ordering it, they were put to death. Because that was once again a Canaanite practice. And that was not just Canaanite practice. It's pretty much, you go to almost any temple back in the day, there were temple prostitutes, and their goal was to get money. Their goal was to feed into the temple in that way and to have these relations outside of marriage. That ran antithetical to everything God is doing. So to mark themselves as different from everyone else, this was not only forbidden, but there were standards for what happened if something were to occur, that there were consequences.
Yeah. I'm curious in verse 9 why she shall be burned to death and not the guy.
Well, because earlier we have in the sexual practices, if they're both found not to have, if she was found in a way that she would not be able to call for help, then she would have been saved. He would not have. And then we have before that, if they're both found in a situation like that, they chose to it, they're both sentenced to death. So I don't know why leave it out here, but it's pretty much that same sense of building off the earlier law. Here's something else we're going to do.
Gotcha.
All right. Anything else?
That's it for that one.
All right. 10 through 15. The priest who is chief among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil is poured, and who has been consecrated to wear the garment, shall not let the hair of his head hang loose, nor tear his clothes. He shall not go into any dead bodies, nor make himself unclean, even for his father or for his mother. He shall not go out of the sanctuary, lest he profane the sanctuary of his God, for the consecration of the anointing oil of his God is on him. I am the Lord. And he shall take a wife in her virginity, a widow or a divorced woman, or a woman who has been defiled, or a prostitute. These shall not marry. But he shall take as his wife a virgin of his own people, that he may not profane his offspring among his people, for I am the Lord who sanctifies him.
Yeah. Again, these standards, purity laws, I could see where, again, these taking from Leviticus kind of out of its context. If you took these verses on its own out of context and today, and it's like, this is how we should live. And this is, become these Puritans, that, set up religion around these laws rather than the whole context of what's going on with Israel and the priests. It can make people uncomfortable or seem kind of outdated and ancient and arcane. But again, this standard that God is setting apart for these particular priests around their neighboring communities, I think is something to take consideration. Not being disheveled, or the vestments or the hair or the clothes. And then, that leads into also, who you're hanging with. It seems like who you're associating with, not just appearance, but who are these shady people that you're hanging with. So, again, it's patriarchal in a sense that these women are put in these positions and how people view women. But, I think how they look and appear is not that far off from also be aware who you're hanging with, I think, or you're marrying or getting into a covenantal relationship with. Yeah.
Well, building off of earlier, if priests are being held to a higher standard, the high priest is held to an even higher standard. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And because he's the one who's supposed to be leading the priest into serving God and the people to do the same. So if he is guilty of sin or being unclean, then the whole system suffers. So his job is to be watchful and mindful of his actions so that the nation didn't suffer, whether it be in how he offered sacrifices to God or how he married. So that's something it's not lonely at the top is the word I'm looking for here. It's the idea of if you're at the top, you're the big guy, you got to be mindful. You got to be watchful because you're the one everyone judges themselves by, for good or real.
Yeah. I know the Catholic Church, in terms of priests, don't marry. They lead a celibate life. But I believe in the Greek Orthodox tradition, priests can marry. But if you ever want to become a bishop or archbishop, you can't be married. So that's one of those things that I should probably double check that before saying that out loud. But from what I understand, that that's part of it. Again, in terms of responsibility, the standard you're held to, what you're called to shepherd and navigate, has a lot of expectations and responsibility that comes along with it.
Yeah. And as well, we see that he's not even supposed to tear his own clothes, in moments like this. So if you recall, way later on in the Gospels, Caiaphas, high priest, doing the exact same, supposedly someone who followed the law so well, doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Just a little anecdote there. Not a major focus I want to put, but one that just I find interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
All right, 16 through 24. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron, saying, None of your offspring throughout their generations who has a blemish may approach to offer the bread of his God. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near, a man blind or lame, or one who has mutilated face or a limb too long, or a man who has an injured foot or an injured hand, or a hunchback or a dwarf, or a man with a defect in his sight, or an itching disease, or scabs, or crushed testicles. No man of the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a blemish shall come near to offer the Lord's food offerings. Since he has a blemish, he shall not come near to offer the bread of his God. He may eat the bread of his God, both of the most holy and of the holy things, but he shall not go through the veil or approach the altar, because he has a blemish, that he may not profane my sanctuaries, for I am the Lord who sanctifies them. So Moses spoke to Aaron and to his sons and to all the people of Israel. Well, clearly God hates ugly people and disabled.
Yeah, go. Yeah, and that's why this is my favorite passage in all of the Bible. No, just kidding. Listen, is your favorite John 3:16, or I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or Psalm 23? No, it's Leviticus 21:16 through 24. Oh yeah, all right, Christian. What's your hot take on why God doesn't like people with disabilities?
Yeah, he loves them. But what he's saying right here, these verses aren't written because God doesn't love the crippled, blemished, or afflicted. But it continues on through one of the great general themes of the book of Leviticus, where holiness is meant to lead one towards perfection. In our corruptible human state, we are impure by nature, both inside and out. But if the sacrifices the priests made were supposed to be without blemish, the animals, then so too were the priests who sacrificed them. These same laws also forbade priests, those very same priests, from being mistreated or cast out because of the deformity or something like that. But instead, this guaranteed them a place in their own families and the right to receive food as if they were priests, preventing them from begging or being made into slaves simply because of how they looked. And God specifies 3 times over that he is still their God to show that they are still loved by him and accepted by him. It's just, they just can't do the job the other priests do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that distinction, like, again, taken out of context, you're like, wow, what does God have against these kinds of people? But there's a certain priestly role that's happening, and there's other areas in the rest of Scripture. You know, even look at Christ himself, who, you know, touched the lame and the leper and the blind and invited them to the table and to be a part of things. So again, when you take these laws to extreme or too literal or out of context, then you get the type of religion or spirituality that even Jesus himself was like, nope, that's not God's posture towards these kinds of people. And even in the early church, like the priests, you know, there's some who fell away from faith or were sinners or did things that were not great. And so, but the church said from the beginning, the sacraments themselves aren't determined by the holiness of the actual priest. So that, say I baptize a kid and later on, you know, find out I'm a serial killer, then they're going to be like, oh, so is that baptism invalid? It's like, no, this is something that God has done through will, regardless of his sinful action. That's why, even though I go to the altar and I serve Holy Communion to people every Sunday, that the sacrament is valid and authentic because of what God has done, not necessarily me. That people don't have to worry about, well, did Will like behave well this week? Is this bread and wine going to be efficacious if Will like got mad in traffic and flipped off an old lady? Like, what's going on? You know, is this still work? So they made some distinctions there, but I think here, like you said, there's that symbolism of the offering that's being lifted up as unblemished animals, so then a priest that matches up with that. So you can visually see what's going on. Yeah.
And it's just part of the whole relationship. This entire book, like, obviously holiness is the big word, but it's how that is defined by God that becomes important. It is the unblemished nature. It is coming to him and admitting you're not good enough that defines the relationship between us, because we're not good enough. So my physical looks aside don't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's where's my heart at? That is the ultimate thing that God is trying to work on his people here. Sometimes to good effect when they actually listen. And I'm part of that sometimes.
Yeah. Just the part in like verse 21:20, or a hunch, my tradition, NRSV, the translation, or a hunchback or a dwarf or a man or scabs or crushed testicles, no descendant of Aaron. But like the whole like scabs or eyes or hunchback, broken foot. What about a bad knee? I have an arthritic left knee that, you know, can I, if I'm limping up to the altar, like, that guy, so it's raining that day. He's feeling sore in his knee. Don't get him up there. He's limping. Oh no, imperfection. You know, yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
You have fun with that.
All right. Well, let's get into chapter 22.
Okay.
Verses 1-9. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, so that they abstain from the holy things of the people of Israel, which they dedicate to me, so that they do not profane my holy name. I am the Lord. Say to them, if any one of all your offspring throughout your generations approaches the holy things that the people of Israel dedicate to the Lord, while he has an uncleanness, that person shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. None of the offspring of Aaron who has a leprous disease or a discharge may eat of the holy things until he is clean. Whoever touches anything that is unclean through contact with the dead, or a man who has had an emission of semen, or whoever touches a swarming thing by which he may be made unclean, or a person with whom he may take uncleanness, whatever his uncleanness may be, the person who touches such a thing shall be unclean until the evening, and shall not eat of the holy things unless he has bathed his body in water. When the sun goes down, he shall be clean, and afterward he may eat of the holy things, because they are his food. He shall not eat what dies of itself or is torn by beasts, and so make himself unclean by it. I am the Lord. They shall therefore keep my charge, lest they bear sin for it and die thereby when they profane it. I am the Lord who sanctifies them.
Yeah, they didn't have, high-pressured dishwashers or hand sanitizer or hand soap. Antibacterial hand soap back then that time. So part of this is just being like, yeah, when you eat your food, be clean, like be mindful. It could be a life or death situation when it comes to that.
Yeah. And before that, he's talking about the holy things of God. This is just anything that's been dedicated there. They're not the property of the priests. They don't own the things there. So for them to act in a manner that suggested otherwise showed that they themselves had no real love for God and what he had done for them. And that was probably their hearts are full of greed and pride. And they've forgotten that he had been the one to gift them with everything that was within the tabernacle. So he alone deserved the glory for what they own and their ability to work with him, which is when we get to where you're at, which makes perfect sense. Yeah, be clean. Sorry, Will's office stops shedding light if he stops moving too much.
I know.
So that's what I was laughing at.
So it's like somebody get real deep into this text and just kind of talking to the mic and look at the Bible. My office like, oh, someone must be gone. So we'll just shut off the light. Don't waste electricity. Or whatever Christian just said was completely wrong and God went dark.
I was agreeing with you, so we're both in a bad spot with that. Because, these laws about being unclean apply to them, and they must submit to God and the law by following the purification rituals mentioned earlier in Leviticus. We've covered them multiple times, lest they remain unclean and not worship him appropriately. That's part of their job, is not only to lead the people, but then to practice it by example. And if they can't be bothered to do it, why should the people do it?
Yeah.
And if they can't be bothered to do it, they're screwed, because disease can spread if you touch an unclean thing or you allow the wrong kind of insect in there and it starts biting people. Like, just think about what you're doing and actually care about the people that are under your charge.
Yeah, I talked about swarming things. It's like, ugh, here we go. I wasn't grossed out by the other things. You talk about swarming bugs. I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. Get a little wigged out. And I keep thinking about, like, again, I'm a Christian pastor, so thinking about Jesus and him interpreting the law. I mean, in Matthew, he didn't say I didn't come to abolish the law, but fulfill it. So, he was a practicing Jew. He was a rabbi. He was most likely a Pharisee, of that tradition, which is why he fought with them all the time, because they were closer to his family. Who do you fight with the most? The people the closest to you. So he probably was, because he was part of that tradition. But again, he talks about the law get in the way of people, or is it a law for people or for God? And God gave this as a gift, but not necessarily get in the way of what God is trying to do for the people. So what do you put first, as a roadblock for people, or is it this to help? So he was getting frustrated when it was used as a way to keep people out or marginalize people, rather than opening them up a way to a fuller life with God. And so, again, we can read these texts, and if we take them too literal and as a way to, like, just punish and keep people out, as gatekeepers, really what's behind this is the role of the priest to open up a fuller life to people, have a fuller relationship with God that they're in covenant with.
Yeah. I mean, we can even go into 1 Samuel, which Jesus later quotes from anyways, in regards, I think, to the Sabbath, in regards to David eating the holy bread, which we've just discussed, and we're about to discuss more, is not supposed to be a thing that normal people get to eat. And yet, David doesn't drop dead. Yep. Because the priest gave it to him, because there was a greater need than following that part of the law. There was something more righteous, that was loving your neighbor as yourself, which is always going to supersede a lot of things in the law. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we don't follow certain parts of that. is because not only do not apply to us, but they would get in the way of us loving other people.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Anything else before we move on?
No, that's good.
All right. 10 through 16. A lay person shall not eat of a holy thing. No foreign guest of the priest or hired worker shall eat of a holy thing. But if a priest buys a slave, or your translations may say servant, as his property for money, the slave may eat of it, and anyone born in his house may eat of his food. If a priest's daughter marries a layman, she shall not eat of the contribution of the holy things. But if a priest's daughter is widowed or divorced and has no child, and returns to her father's house, as in her youth, she may eat of her father's food, yet no lay person shall eat of it. And if anyone eats of a holy thing unintentionally, he shall add the fifth of its value to it and give the holy thing to the priest. They shall not profane the holy things of the people of Israel, which they contribute to the Lord, and so cause them to bear iniquity and guilt by eating their holy things, for I am the Lord who sanctifies them.
Sacred donations is kind of how the translation I'm reading kind of articulates it. Sacred donation offers a sacred donation. We just came off Stewardship Sunday yesterday, where people are turning their pledge cards, intention cards. We talked about gifts. Money, finances, keeps the light on, keeps the staff paid, keeps the buildings in use, all those things. But we also talked about different gifts that people give, whether it's food donations or how they offer their gifts in church on Sunday, helping lead worship, or throughout the week, those kinds of things. And, I just can't help but think about what we offer to God and share among ourselves as gifts, as a community to show our devotion to God, but also how I share amongst others. So they're just trying to navigate good stewardship of their sacred offerings and food, and what the priests are to do or not do is a lot deals down with how they're being good stewards of these gifts of God.
Yeah. I mean, because the whole point of their being the only people who could have this is because they're not supposed to be working outside of their work as priests. So they don't need to have a job on the side. They need to be rewarded for their services. And that's why multiple times in Leviticus alone, it mentions this is set aside for the priests. This is not set aside for the priests. This is what you have earned by doing what you're supposed to do. So for someone else to come in who's not a priest and take it would miss the point of why the priests were doing what they were doing and why they needed to be treated especially like this. And they alone were the people who could eat the food left behind by the sacrifices that they made to help guide the people. So an outsider, whether they're an Israelite or from another tribe or a foreigner, could never eat it because it was meant for them alone. And that food just by itself is just not holy in and of itself, but God made it holy for them because it was presented to him in an honoring fashion. Like we said, so that the priest could be provided for.
Yeah. It was a currency. It's not like they're going to hand them a $10 bill or write a check, or swipe their debit card to donate to, to use the QR code in the back of the bulletin at the priestly temple. They're not doing that. This is how the priests are. Their vocation. There's offerings given to them. Like automatic draft of their bank account. Whatever. This is the food offer that how they make a living is a vocational call.
Now, the sole exceptions to this were the slaves and servants of the priests, or for a daughter who had originally married outside of the tribe and then returned to them either through either losing the husband or divorce or what have you. Now, these laws were made here to protect both the slaves and servants, by forcing their masters to provide for them, while also doing the same to a daughter who was no longer married and needed to be cared for. It is explicitly mentioned she has no son, which typically would have been the breadwinner at that point in time. So she needs somewhere to be safe. Well, what's safer, hopefully, than family? Like, come back in.
Yeah. Taking care of their own makes sense.
And it also provides a way out if you accidentally somehow consume some of the food, realize it, there's a way to give back. Not only you give back what you ate, but also a fifth of that. So to say, hey, I screwed up. I'm sorry, God. Let's make things right between us. Yep. So it's not just God looking up there and saying, can't wait for someone to swipe some of that food so I can strike them down.
Yeah. God's accounting. Priest math. We got some priest math going on. Not girl math, not guy math. Is priest math.
Yeah. Priest math.
Yep.
We need more priests in STEM. 17 through 25. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons and all the people of Israel, and say to them, When any one of the house of Israel or of the sojourners in Israel presents a burnt offering as his offering for any of their vows or freewill offerings that they offer to the Lord, if it is to be accepted for you, it shall be a male without blemish, of the bulls or the sheep or the goats. You shall not offer anything that has a blemish, for it will not be acceptable for you. And when anyone offers a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord, to fulfill a vow, or as a freewill offering from the herd or from the flock, to be accepted, it must be perfect. There shall be no blemish in it. Animals blind or disabled and mutilated, or having a discharge or an itch or scabs, you shall not offer to the Lord, or give them to the Lord as a food offering on the altar. You may present a bull or a lamb that is a part too long or too short for a freewill offering, but for a vow offering it cannot be accepted. Any animal that has its testicles bruised or crushed or torn or cut, you shall not offer to the Lord, and you shall not do it within your land, neither shall you offer as the bread of your God any such animals gotten from a foreigner. Since there is blemish in them because of their mutilation, they will not be accepted for you.
Man, these poor animals that basically don't give God crappy meat. We're not. We're not giving God leftovers. Don't feel like you can skimp and just give the priests, or those working for the Lord, your worst animal out of your herd. Again, they don't have a bank account. They don't have a savings account. They don't have stock. They don't have Bitcoin. They have these animals. That's their currency. That's their livelihood and the wealth that they have. And so what they offer to the Lord is like the good stuff. Bring the good stuff. We don't want like fair food. We want Ruth Chris. That's what we want.
Yeah, like has been mentioned multiple times, every time one of these sacrifices is brought up, the animals that were presented to God were supposed to be a perfect sacrifice without blemish. This forced the offerer to give up the best of what they had and not to weasel out of this by offering a poorer animal or a bad animal that they couldn't care less about. The whole point was supposed to be a sacrifice in both the literal way and of you giving up something else. And I mean, you get all Sunday school and everyone, the same way God offered his perfect sacrifice in Jesus, who was without sin or blemish and was the only one capable of offering himself for our sake. So if he expected that standard of us, he expects that same standard for himself when it comes to redeeming us to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming off of Stewardship Sunday in terms of, when I think of stewardship for my community that I take care of, that I help shepherd, I want their offerings to be a part of their discipleship and spiritual practice. And so if you're giving just to let you spend everything out and you just give God the leftovers or not the best that you have to offer, or then that also kind of shows how you view your relationship with God, and how you're devoted to God or not, your loyalty to God. So again, I'm not a televangelist. Like if you love God, then you're going to give more money than you're able to give or whatever. That's not how we're doing it. But out of a response to God's love, God loved us first. Because God loves us, therefore we are called to live lives worthy of that love and to share that love back to God and others. And so we do that with every part of ourselves, whether it's my life and my words that I use and how I treat other people, but also my bank account as well. You can look at my check register, my record of the bills I paid. You can see where my priorities are. So yeah, I got to pay the bills, but if I'm spending a lot of money on entertainment and comic books and movies, and then I give God like $5 in the offering plate, then what has more priority? Where are my priorities? Is with a lot of other things than God. And so that's what we try to say, that stewardship is an extension of your discipleship and how you follow Jesus as a spiritual practice. And so not to guilt you or to be a televangelist to just so that I can have the brand new Tesla, or I can have the brand new boat, or I can have a brand new surfboard. This is like care for your soul and how you understand the gifts given to you. So I think that's the framework we try to do here. And I think what's going on in this text as well.
Yeah, well said. And that's part of your liturgical calendar, right? I asked that out of ignorance. I've never actually looked at a Lutheran liturgical calendar.
Is Stewardship Sunday part of the liturgical calendar?
Yes.
No, that's kind of something extra. So the liturgical calendar revolves around the seasons of like Jesus's life, like Advent and Christmas and Easter and Lent and things. But there's festival days. I'm looking a little bit ahead. Teaser, y'all. We get to chapter 23. You're going to have some appointed festivals. You're going to see that the Israelites had their own liturgical calendars and seasons of the year. The Lutherans are part of that. Catholics, liturgical practicing churches do that. But Stewardship Sunday is kind of a necessary thing that's not necessarily part of the feast day, but or an official date on the calendar. But as we're thinking about how to use our gifts and how we're going to plan our budget for next year, then we take up pledges. We ask people to challenge people to give, and think about how they can give for next year and stay faithful to what they promise that they're going to give the church. So if next year we plan to do, a big outreach, Rise Against Hunger event that costs $5,000 to do so we can help feed people that are hungry in our community and beyond, then we can't do that unless the church funds it. So, so it's like, if we want to do this next year and we feel this is important, then please, fill out your pledge card or intention card to let us know that that's what you want us to do. If you don't, then we're not going to be able to do it. So, it kind of helps set the intention of what we want to do for our goals and community life as a community. So it's kind of a necessary fall thing for churches to do that do pledge drives or stewardship campaigns. It's not necessarily in the official liturgical calendar of the seasons of the church year, but it's definitely necessary as an organization to think about how we're going to pool our money and resources together and then use that for the building up of God's kingdom.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. I see the wisdom in doing something like that, especially with a large project like that you need stuff to get done. You need people to pledge. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And, and also we have a somewhat large, medium-sized staff. We have a handful of full-time ministers and employees at the church. So if we want them to feel like they're being supported financially so they can do the best of their job, then we need to think through about cost of living, what's inflation or not, raises, what can we afford? And then also to challenge the congregation to say, like, if you want Pastor Will, Pastor Katie, Holly, Deacon Holly, and others to do their job without being stressed out about how they pay the bills and those kinds of things, then support this budget for next year and let us know that you're pledging and intending to support it in the new year. So that's why that's important. And if we set a budget for the new year and our pledges come back half of that, then we got to reassess and be like, oh, okay, you guys are telling us that we got to do some shifts. Do we have to fire somebody? Do we have to cut back in certain areas? We got to pay the bills so that you can come to church and have lights on and heat on or whatever. But also, if you want some staff to keep things rolling. So all that comes into play. And I think these passages in Leviticus are definitely the stewardship aspect of how they're pulling their resources and taking care of their priests and shepherds in their midst.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing you can't really always just go with the flow. There needs to be a structure. There needs to be a principle behind it. It's like, this is how we receive money. This is how you can be a part of that. This is where we're putting that money at, so you know where your money is going.
Yeah.
And it's not just going into my pocket, it's super important.
Yeah, and I had one of our campus ministry students, not to get it, we're just coming off stewardship, so I'm thinking about this kind of stuff, so you got me. And that's why I kind of wanted to focus on these passages too, but I had a student once who was pushing back a little bit, a campus ministry student who was like, I'm all for religion, but not organized religion. I'm for spirituality, but not organized spirituality. The organized religion is flawed and corrupt. And I'm like, all right, well, Zach, like you're big on Relay for Life, right? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, you're all for raising money for cancer research and help those who have cancer. He said, yeah. And I said, well, what if I said I was for cancer research, but not organized cancer research. And he was like, what? I was like, what if I was like, I'm all for curing cancer, but I don't want any institutions getting in the way, or planning, or fundraisers, or budgets, or committees, because they're all corrupt. Someone could steal that money. Those committees could be slack. And he was like, no, we need to organize so that we can. I was like, yes, if we're a church of people who are coming together to try to think about and discern how God's calling us to be the church together and spread the good news and share the gospel, then we're going to have to be organized. We're going to have to form budgets because we're sharing our money. It can't be unorganized. And so in the same way, you wouldn't say like, I'm for cancer research, just not organized cancer research. It's like, that's ridiculous. So same way with the church. Yeah, they're flawed. We're imperfect. We make mistakes, which, I think what these passages try to lift up a little bit. Nobody's perfect. And how do you do that? But anyway, I think there has to be some of that, and think through and be intentional with that, or you're just going to, it's not going to be as effective. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's finish off these verses with 26 through 33. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when an ox or sheep or goat is born, it shall remain 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day on it shall be acceptable as a food offering to the Lord. But you shall not kill an ox or a sheep and her young in 1 day. And when you sacrifice the sacrifice of thanksgiving to the Lord, you shall sacrifice it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten on the same day. You shall leave none of it until morning. I am the Lord. So you shall keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. And you shall not profane my holy name, that I may be sanctified among the people of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord.
Yeah. I love how it closes with like the because God saved you out of Israel, therefore I am your God. This is how I want you to live as my people. It's not that God gave them this law before he saved them out of the land of Egypt and said, if you obey it perfectly, then I'll save you. No, God saved them first, then said, this is how I want you to do it. Therefore, this is how I want you to live as my people. So you hear that gospel and kind of good news of the approach and the posture that God has here. I'm the one who saved you I delivered you. So therefore, this is how I want you to live as my people and as a community together. And then we hear some animal rights. PETA might not be very excited about what's going on here, but at least they're like not against taking like freshly born like cattle and sheep and eating them right away. At least let them be with their mom a week.
Yeah. I mean, to go to that point, it's like part of this process should not just be cruel. Like, let them have time with their mother. Let them grow a little bit so they can actually be a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I think something I also read up on is this may be referencing a Canaanite ritual where a mother and child were both killed under a same sacrifice. And that is also something that I'm supposed to emulate. I think it had something to do with like the duality of life and death or something. I'd have to look it up again. Okay. But yeah, just don't do that. Give the animal time to grow. There's also something to be said of in the same way that boys weren't supposed to be circumcised until 8 days, after birth, because the number 7 is holy in Israelite culture. So too was brought up here. I'm not taking a bullet for that one, but I did see someone bring it up.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Reach your own conclusions.
Yeah. Yeah. If 7 means perfection, then the 8 is like beyond perfection, or the 8th day of new creation or something new going on, is kind of neat to think about too with this. But yeah, again, animals, if you're an animal lover, you're not gonna like these portions of things. But again, they didn't have a checkbook. They only had what their currency was their livestock.
Yes. And in here, like we see God kind of summing up the totality of what he's been building up in this entire book, and that he's been commanding the Israelites to do these things by declaring that he himself is the Lord. He alone is the one who can make these commands, proclaim what is righteous and what is unclean. Moses didn't get to do that. Priests didn't get to do that. Joshua didn't get to do that. Both are Joshua and this Joshua in Scripture. No one else but God alone. And we have the blessed opportunity now to not be under a lot of the law that the Israelites did. But that doesn't mean that we are free from his morality and his truth. So we need to understand which is which and follow it to the letter. And that takes a lot of work. That's not something you can just say, okay, well, man, putting 4 tassels on my cloak, I guess I sinned today, or I put 3 instead of 4. Like, no, like just learning which part of it here is actual morality, which part is God setting his people apart from other people, and what is how God is separating his priests from the people. Your moral laws, civil laws, priestly laws. We follow the moral law.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then as a Lutheran pastor, and Luther had a lot to say about the use of the law, the first and second and third use of the law, and those kinds of things. We don't have time to get into that right now, but in terms of understanding grace and law and how they work together, and those kinds of things, a big part of the Reformation tradition as well, that we still wrestle with today and think through in terms of God's law, moral law. Natural law, but also what's revealed in Scripture as well. So a lot there to kind of think through. But then ultimately that good news of I delivered you, and because of that, therefore, this is how I'm discerning how to live as God people among a lot of neighboring and differing communities and diversity around you. So, and that survival that goes along with that.
Yeah, and so too, he also says that they are never to profane his name, which is him saying, don't attach it to things that have nothing to do with him. In addition to, like we covered all the way back in Exodus 20, no swearing, and that's one thing, but like don't utilize the name of God for the purposes that have nothing to do with them, like certain people do today. I could mention by name that would claim that certain people being in charge is God directly anointing them versus God allowing them to be there as part of his purposes. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it there unless you have something you'd like to add.
No, there's definitely a callback here to the commandments and not taking the Lord's name in vain, and how you're representing God in front of the people, in front of the masses, and even among other nations. So they definitely call back to those commandments in Exodus.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got. How you feeling?
Good. I'm looking, and you have 5 chapters left in Leviticus, right?
Yep.
And then you're going to go into Numbers. You're like, how is that going to? You're going to, oh man, God bless you for having to pronounce all those names and read those genealogies.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that part.
Oh man, I get the most nervous in front of people having to, read names or remember names or pronounce names correctly. I have a baptism this Sunday, and little Vivian, I'm like, I know I'm going to mispronounce Vivian's. I'm going to say something stupid, like I don't know.
Yeah,
but I'm nervous. But yeah, all those names. Yeah, look forward to listening to that. I'll put it in my earbuds and listen to you as I fall asleep at night. You reading all those complicated biblical names.
Like nothing makes me more fearful than realizing that verses and chapters like those really bring out my stutter and lisp in ways that normally doesn't come out, and go, oh, Lord help me. I got to get through all this. Mm-hmm. But it'll be okay. We'll get through it. And I'm sure the open invite to you is always there. If there's anywhere in Numbers you want to go, you don't have to answer right now. I'll ask you later on.
Yeah, I'll just pick a couple chapters where you just read a bunch of names. Like, cool. Yeah, that's great. They sound like cool people, and maybe I'll name my pet after one of those, complicated biblical names just to do it. Who knows?
Well, thank you again for joining me, Will.
Yeah.
Where can the good people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, and then I am in Chapel Hill, shepherding Holy Trinity Lutheran Church and Lutheran Campus Ministry. We have a website and Instagram with our church as well. So if you're interested in what we're up to and our approach to ministry and the gospel and those things, then check us out. Be happy to. And if you have any questions of what we do and why we do it and those kinds of things, I'm always open for conversation, either face to face or online.
Yeah. And I will say Will has been a wonderful friend and has looked after me in multiple ways. Once again, like I mentioned earlier, opened up his house to me and let this guy just stay there. And had a great old time there while he was in the midst of some, we shall say, post-election mourning, Pang. And I got to hang out with him. Oh, you guys don't know Pang if you don't know systematic ecology. She's a good friend of ours, co-host there. And just have fellowship with each other. It was just a good time.
I agree. Yeah, it was life giving. I'm glad we could partner up, hanging out at a Comic-Con together and be an example and a witness there, being priests to the geeks. That's what we're doing, priests to the geeks. Nobody offered us their popcorn or hot dog or unblemished Diet Mountain Dew, but we were definitely priests, priests for the geeks that weekend.
Excellent. All right, guys. Thank you all for everything you do. If you get a chance, please leave a 5-star review in your podcasting platform of choice to help us with the ratings there and find more people. If you're interested in my own picture and writing, you can find my works at starvingwritersguild.com or on Amazon by searching for the name MC Ashley. If you're also interested in some further solid studies into the Bible and its teachings, then check out the other members of the Anazal Ministries podcasting network. You can find me specifically on systematic ecology, why I don't like, Friday Night Frights, and some joyful noises. You can contact me at letnothingmoveyoupodcast@gmail.com. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Joshua Knoll for the editing that he does and for the music he adds to the podcast. And with all that in mind, God bless you all in accordance to his will and not mine. And allow me one more time to remind you, let nothing move you.
Hey guys, are you interested in podcasting but don't know where to go? Well, check out Zencaster.com and go ahead and make an account there and use special promo code Let Nothing Move You, all caps. That way you can get 30% off of your next deal to go ahead and set things up so you can figure out how to edit stuff using Zencaster.com to host your stuff, to get things done there. So check out Zencaster.com, use special promo code Let Nothing Move You. All right, see ya.